Okay, so we're going to begin with exercise 219. A lot of you already have your topo models turned in. I'm just going to take them up here in a big long row, and while you guys are working today, I'll go through and I'll grade them all, and then you can take them and do whatever it is you want with them. But it's a one-shot deal. I don't want to store it. I'm just going to put it back where it is, and then you can take it at the end without a problem. So anyway, that's turning in assignment 202. Exercise 219 is a bit of a doozy in terms of steps and parts and pieces, but basically what you're going to be doing today is continuing what you did last class and working on it. But I don't have an infinite number of days to be able to tell you, oh, we're going to do this and then we're going to do that. I have to start front loading. This is what you're eventually going to do, even if your building itself isn't as fully resolved as you'd like it to be. So our purpose today is essentially to start putting your building into the actual site and to start getting it ready to start doing some renderings. I'm also not under the delusions that when I give you a handout like this, you're going to be able to complete everything that I ask you to do and it's all going to be perfect. That's very unrealistic on my end. So going forward, starting today and then going forward, when you finish working for the day, even if you don't get accomplished what I'm asking you to get accomplished, I want you to still make a post of wherever you are. So sometimes you'll finish and you won't give me anything that's related to what I wanted for that particular exercise. That's okay. You were here, you worked, give me a post, I'll give you credit for it anyway. People work at different paces, you're working on different things. It's just kind of the nature of it. But I have a schedule to keep. I have to make sure we get from here to the end of the semester and you get the knowledge that you need to get. Today, we're going to work on, like I said, on getting that building into the site, figuring out where it's going to go and that sort of thing. Next class, we're actually going to take a break from this and we'll start doing lighting. And I'll teach you the basics of lighting and then we'll come back to this and actually put some lights into this file. So it all kind of weaves back together in terms of where we're going. So when we start conceiving of this project as a whole, we're going to end up with at least two files that we'll work with primarily. One file will be your building itself, and so I've called that file my retreat base, which is right here. Then you'll have a, now I've worked on it before, it's okay. You're not going to be this far along. I have my retreat base, and then I'm going to have my master site file. So there's really two pieces that I'm going to be working with. They'll end up being more. I'll have more block references. We'll put furniture in and that sort of thing. But for right now, there's really two files that I'm going to work with. And at this point, we have a choice. We can bring the site into the building or the building into the site. And in my opinion, bringing the building into the site is a far better strategy. The site is a relatively light file. We can get our views set up in that file, and we'll concentrate on our building in just this building file. The other big advantage to this is for those of you that want to work on your own but don't have V-Ray on your computer, this file is a safe file to open and work on. When we get into lighting settings, the lighting is all going to be in the site file, and if you open the site file on a computer that doesn't have V-Ray installed, it's possible that your lights can get corrupted, which you don't want to have happen. So I would encourage you to make these files this way, work on your building outside of class, spend your time there, and then when you're here in class, that's when you just update it, bring it in, open that master site file, and deal with the lighting and the V-Ray setting. The truth is you're going to want to do your renderings here because we're going to do distributed rendering and it's going to be a whole lot faster than relying on your computer to do the rendering. So I have my retreat base file here and I've started working on it. I've done this project so that it sits kind of on the side of the hill a little bit. And we're going to think about how this integrates into the building site. So I have this one ready. I probably could use a little bit more work at my layers, making sure they're nice and clean, but I have attempted to already organize my layers just a bit. I have a master layer called the Artist Retreat. Then underneath it, I have a variety of other layers, including a default layer, blocks layer. And then I have interior, exterior, landscape, This is a window, I think. The pools are turned off. I'll do the pool later on because you always want to know how to render water. So I'll end up doing that a little bit later on. And I should make sure that fountain is off. And I have a construction layer that's just something for me to work on. So I have spent some time. I've tried to organize it a little bit so it's not too out of hand. And I've gone ahead and I've saved this file. The next piece is actually creating the site to bring this into. So I'm going to go ahead and minimize this, and I will open a new Rhino. And instead of going in Rhino and saying File Open or File New, I want to keep them both open at the same time. So I'm going to open a brand new Rhino. It's going to be large object inches as my template. And at this point, I want to bring in that site information. So I could go into SketchUp and get it, or I could use the site SketchUp file that I already gave you. So I'm going to bring that file in. And this is a bit of repetition. You guys have already done this many times. So I'll go into File and then Import, because I'm going to bring it directly into the scene. And I will go to my flash drive here. I apologize. I have to remember where I saved this. There it is. Okay. How many people are doing the ocean? How many people are doing the mountains? All right, so you're about 50-50. I was going to do one over the other because I have to pick right now which one to do. I'll do the ocean, and maybe I'll end up doing both so you guys can see it. So I've gone ahead and I brought in the ocean file. There it is. Remember, this is a SketchUp mesh file that I brought in. I can delete the little person. I don't need that. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time organizing, just like I've been doing. I want my original SketchUp mesh to be on a layer called SketchUp. So I'll right-click and say Change Object Layer. I'm also going to keep this file. Let me right-click and say Change Object Layer. The reason I want to keep that one is if I switch into rendered mode, I should see the preview of what's going on. And I might use that a little bit later on, or that material a little bit later on. So it's not a bad thing to just keep that around for later. So those are both on the SketchUp layer. I want to create a new NURB surface because I want to smooth it out a little bit. It's not necessary that you do it. However, the building integration is going to work a lot better if you create the NURB surface ahead of time. So on layer 1 here, I'm going to call this Contour. I could do Contour X and Contour Y. I'm going to do it all on one layer. I'll call it Contour XY. How about that? I have my mesh here. I'm going to type Contour. I have to turn on my object snap. I'm going to do end, mid, perpendicular, and I'm also going to do knot and vertex because I'm dealing with the mesh here. And we'll do one in this direction at 100 feet. Not as accurate as I'd like. Let's do it at 50 feet. There we go. A little bit better. We'll do this one. In that direction at 50 feet as well. There we go. And now I can turn off the SketchUp file altogether, and I'm left with just that mesh. We're going to do the curved network out of this. So let's look at it in the top view, clean up the edges. So I'm going to trim and get rid of all of those pieces. Oops, too close. Let me make this a little bit bigger. It'll make the selection easier. All right, so I've trimmed off all those edges. Those look good. I'll now do a curve network of these curves. So I'll select them all and go up to my surface curve network, or I could type network SRF into the command line. See if I can just skip over those. There we go. Remember, this process tends to take a little bit of time, so bear with me. All right. I'm going to deselect. I'll select that black object. I'll type rebuild. And remember, this is somewhere between 200 by 200 and maybe 50 by 50. I'm going to try it at 150 by 150 and see what it looks like. And let's put it on its own layer here. And we'll call this terrain. I'm going to view this in shaded mode. And there it is. Let me turn off my contour XY. Oh, looks like I never actually put that on its correct layer. All right. So if we look at this, it's reasonably smooth. Maybe 125 by 125. And I'll say OK. All right, that looks pretty good. So I have my terrain set up. Now it's going to be time to bring in that block of my building. And we're going to keep working with this, and I'm going to add the ocean and whatever so that we can get there. But I need to think about where my building really belongs. And of course, being familiar with the site, I've already kind of picked out where I think the building belongs. For you guys, it may take a little bit of time to sort out where that building belongs. I'm going to try to nestle it right into about there. I could also nestle it right into about there. The orientation works pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and let's save this before I move on. I'm going to go to File and Save. And I have a folder set up for my artist's retreat. And this is going to be the master site. And this is the spring of 2019. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. There we go. Then I'll go to Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And I'm going to go find that I need to be looking for the retreat base. I'm going to then drop that one in as a block reference. A couple things that are important here. These are all fine. We'll go ahead and say OK. But in here, we want to make sure that we're linking it and that it's a reference layer style, because we want to be able to update it and we want to make sure that it's not weighing down this file too much. So we'll go ahead and link it as a reference file. We'll go ahead and say OK. We can see here that it's creating the retreat base right there. And the other thing about this is that when Rhino creates a block, so there it is, the block exists as an object independent of the objects that are contained within the block. So it doesn't hurt to give yourself a layer called blocks or blocks, and then take this object and put it on the blocks layer. That way you have control over the block. At least I thought we did. It's just low. So we need to move this and start to manipulate it so that we can get it into our correct position. So sometimes it's better to look at it in the top view and to turn the shaded mode on, because you can kind of look down and see, where does it sort of belong. I'm going to move that over. It's maybe right about in there, maybe a little bit over in here, something like that from a positioning standpoint. That can be easier than trying to do it in the 3D view. Then I need to move that V for vertical, and I'm going to pull it up. And I may have pulled it a little bit far. Move it, V for vertical. I'm going to turn off all my snaps here for a second to make it a little bit easier. And you can kind of see as I'm coming down, all right, it's starting to integrate into the site. You see that? And if I get to a certain point, yeah, right about there, okay, that's not too bad. I'm going to hit escape and I'm going to look at it and say, okay, that's hitting about where I want it to. I'm not intersecting any of the windows. I've got some issues, and obviously the slope is going right through the building in certain parts. But that feels pretty good. That's close to where I want it to go. This I envisioned as a little bit of a retaining wall, so okay, I'm okay with that placement. If I zoom out a little bit, I say, okay, does that feel like it's about where I want it to be on the coast? Yeah, it's about right. So now that I have the block in place here, I need to actually cut out the terrain for the block, and I also need to modify part of the terrain, like this retaining wall section here. So we'll start by cutting out the terrain. Let me clean up my layers a little bit. We'll keep the SketchUp layer here. I'm going to get rid of all these other layers. Oh, darn Susan. She's on layer 0. I've got to get rid of her. We go into my block manager. Let's get rid of Susan. There you go. She's gone. Now I should be able to get rid of layer 0. There we go. Okay, and I'll give myself a construction layer. This is just a temporary layer. I could actually just keep using the default layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a polyline. And in the top view, let me switch back to wireframe mode. I'm going to trace over the outline of my building. So I'll start, let me turn back on my snaps here, and I'll start there, and I'll work my way around the building. My walls are the purple lines, so I can use that to my advantage because I can trace right over the purple. But I do want it to accommodate this. Go that to right about there. Whoops. All right, and then I'll go ahead and type C to close it, and I've now created a curve that is the outline of my building. So if I look down on it there, it's not the most accurate because it goes up and down and whatever, but it's still the outline of my building. So if I work on it in the top view, and I type project, and I project that line onto my surface right here, it creates a perfect outline for what I need to cut out of the terrain. So we'll go ahead and use the trim tool now to remove that part of the building. So I was careful and I didn't remove too much of the terrain back over in here because I wasn't quite sure where that was going to end, and I didn't want to cut out too much up here. So it's now in the building. If I were to jump inside the building here, I don't have terrain running through my building, so that's good. It's sunk in the correct way, but I'd like to integrate this part of the building just a little bit better into that hillside. I envision this flattening out just a little bit. So we'll take a little bit more to adjust it. And I'm going to start here. And I'm going to go to right there. Ideally, I would go down about 4 inches. And maybe I'll draw that in first. Let me start right there. And I'm going to type 4 inches, going straight down. How did I type 4 feet instead of 4 inches? Try that one more time. There it is. There's my 4 inches. And then I can use my perpendicular snap right there. And we'll pull this back out to over there. All that's doing is it's giving me a reference point for where I want the terrain to fall eventually. And so we'll go ahead and go from here to there. And I'd like to know where this surface intersects with my wall. It's obviously intersecting. Actually, better yet, I'd like to know where this intersects with my wall. So I'm going to take this curve and this surface, and I'm going to type intersect. And it's going to give me a point where the two intersect. I can then draw a line from that point. I turn on point snap there up to that point right there. This line here doesn't follow the surface. It's close, but not quite. So I'm going to need to project that onto the surface. So I'll come back here and type project onto that surface. And there it is. So this line plus that line plus this line there are close to what I need for a curved network to create this little bit of surface. I need to do a little bit of modification. Let me go to trim and get rid of that extra piece of the line. Nope. Do it from underneath. Get rid of that extra piece of the line. I also need to get rid of that little stub piece right there. OK. I'll hit enter to finish, explode. So there's 4 separate line segments. And then I can go up to the surface curve network. And that's going to build that piece of the surface. It's going to match in perfectly with this edge, because I made the transition along that edge. And then I flatten it out to fill in that piece of the surface there. If I wanted to, I could actually trim off the purple surface that's underneath. Right now I have redundant purple surface there. I can go into the top view. I can project down onto the purple surface. And then I could trim that piece of the purple surface away. Like that. It doesn't really matter, except that now I can take these 2 pieces and actually join them together, which can help in the texture mapping a little bit. So I've just made that little bit of a modification to allow those to flow in together. And basically, this is starting to feel like it belongs in the scene as part of the site. So that's good. So I have this in. This is still all a block reference. So I haven't done anything. Now, for me, obviously, I've pulled this into the site before. I've spent some time figuring it out. When you go to pull yours in, you may find that you need bigger foundation to be able to put this one in. Or a retaining wall might need to get longer. Now, if you're working up on the top of the site where it's relatively flat, you don't have to do too much. But you're still going to have to work a little bit with the foundation. So if you find that something wasn't quite long enough, you see that I made the foundation way more than deep enough as it goes through. But if it wasn't quite deep enough, you can jump back over into this file and you can make modifications. So let's say that, hold on, I have to turn on my object snap here. For argument's sake, let's say that I hadn't done this before and that my foundation wasn't big enough. I'll save this. Hold on a second, has to update. Okay, so there it is. I didn't have it extended down far enough, and I needed that to extend. In this scenario, I would go back to my file here, and I would extend that piece of foundation down so that it would more than be enough to go through my scene. So let me go ahead and scale 1D on it. And I'll drop this one down So that's more than enough, and I'll go to File and then Save. I can then jump back over into this file, and I can update my block, Edit, Blocks, Block Manager, and we can go ahead and update that file. So that's how to add the building and site integration. That's step or part 1 and part 2. Part 3 talks about exterior geometry. That's essentially what I was just doing, where I need this retaining wall to be a little bit longer. I need something to be stretched a little bit. Those are the modifications that you're going to need. Buildings always have foundations, and ground is never perfectly flat. It's just the way life is. There's always a slope to any site. So that being said, you're going to have to make a few modifications. Give yourself a little bit of extra space, extra depth where necessary. Okay, so the next part is starting to establish where are the views going to be? Where do I want to make my renderings? And so as I'm looking at this particular building, doing a rendering from back here, looking at that, it's not the most exciting part of my building. The truth is, the fun part of my building is looking toward this side. So as I start to establish my view, I'm going to want to set up a rendering that's somewhere in that neighborhood. Now, when we start talking about views, we might want to get a little bit more specific. In this scenario, the default view is a 50mm camera lens, which is kind of a telephoto lens. We're not going to get too much distortion around the edges, but we're also not going to get too wide of a view. If nothing is selected in my master site file, I can go to Properties, and I can look right here under Camera, and it's going to tell me the lens length is currently at 50. I can change that lens length down to make it a little bit wider, say maybe 28, and this is going to feel a little bit more dramatic. It's a subtle change, but it's a little bit of a different change. If you go to do an interior rendering, which we're going to do, you might even switch it all the way down to like an 18, which is really wide. And you can see it there at 18. It starts to kind of distort pieces of the building. We could go even finer than that. We could go down to maybe 10, and it's going to be real distorted when we start to get in close. That's going to work nicely for an interior rendering. If I jumped into the inside and I wanted to see everything that's going on in a particular room, you're going to get a wider angle. Even 10 is a little bit much for me. I tend to stick to about 18 for an interior. So when we jump outside, though, I think 28 is not too bad. So I'm going to go to 28, and then I'm going to start to really align my view and start to feel like, okay, I'm liking this. Maybe I want it to be a little bit more like that. Remember, I can use the pan tool as well if I start to, okay, I want to cut that part of my building off. I want to look that way because all I want to see is ocean out here and a little bit of grass right there. Okay, maybe this is the right view. Do I like having this part of the building cut off? Not really. Let me pan and pull that down ever so slightly. There you go. I'm feeling like I've got this set up. This is the way I want it. The angle's right. This is going to be a good rendering. Now it's time to save that rendering. And we've done this a little bit before, but I'm going to emphasize this even more now. And that is that we're going to go to the little downward facing triangle and go to Set View, Named Views. And before I ever perform a rendering, I want to save the view. So this is going to be Render 1. And I would encourage you here not to put any spaces in these names. So keep it without spaces. I'm going to call this one Render 1. It could be Exterior Render 1 or something along those lines. The advantage of saving these rendered views is you can keep modifying and then jump back to the exact view and do the same rendering. You don't have to waste time finding that render view anymore. So I have that view established. I might also spend some time and play around with a few other views. Maybe I want to be as if I'm standing on top of the hill looking down at the building. Maybe that's a view that I want to try to see, or I want to look at it more. Yeah, maybe it needs to be looking down on the building, maybe something like that. We can get more technical if we want, in that we can show the camera itself. I can click on this downward facing arrow, and I can go to Set Camera, and I can turn on the Show Camera icon here. Now when I do that, nothing happens in this view, but the camera shows up in all the other views. And so you can actually see the placement of the camera itself, and you can see the target, which is the middle one, there you go, as to what it's looking at. if I were to move that camera point, let me go ahead and just type move here. The camera angle, see how it's changing in the render 1 view? So I can manipulate the camera independent of the view. I can do zoom and pan and dolly inside the view itself, but I can also manipulate the target of the camera in an external view. And so frequently you'll end up doing this. We will do this a little bit more in depth when we do the interior, because we're going to set the height of the camera to be at eye level so that we're looking at it in the correct orientation. So anyway, this might be my render 2 view, for example, in which case I go to the little downward triangle and I go to set view, named views, and this would suddenly become render 2. And so I strongly encourage you to save these rendered views, because then you can go back and re-render as you make modifications. You change the texture mapping, you go back and re-render. Change the lighting settings, you go back and re-render. And so once you have those views, it makes it really easy. So that's setting up the ideal view. The next part is part 5, which is setting up the HDRI environment for your file. Remember, we did that. We have to do that one again. At this point in the semester, I'm not expecting you to have to do it completely from scratch. I taught you that part of it, but we can use the presets. If you go to V-Ray Resources and then the V-Ray Quick Rendering Setups, you could use any one of these. When you're doing your renderings, I would say that the day scenes are the day scenes. The sunsets and the nights are kind of the same. You could make an argument maybe that if it's a sunset but the sun's above the horizon, then it's a day view. And if the sunset's below the horizon, one of them is below and one of them is above, then the one that's below is a night view. Making your arguments for you. Anyway, you guys can figure it out. Stay away from the night views right now. I'm going to use the Malibu Overlook view because it has an ocean in it, which is particularly useful in this particular view. I think what I'll end up doing is, I don't know whether I'll do it today or another day, but I'll flip over and I'll do the Tahoe so you guys can see me work on both files. Anyway, so I'm going to go ahead and download this. I already have it there. This is all the information that you need. This visopt file will allow me to load it. I also have this one already downloaded. If you want to save this, you will right-click on it and say Save Link As, and make sure that you save it as a visopt file. So let's go ahead and load that one in. I'll jump right here. Let me close this. And I'm going to go to my V-Ray options. And with the V-Ray options, I'm going to open one of the drawers. It doesn't matter which one. And then I'll click on the load icon. I'll go into my flash drive, into my resources, into V-Ray, into my V-Ray HDRI. These are day HDRIs, and I have the Malibu Overlook, and there's the visopt file for it. We'll go ahead and say open. The reason that I open one of the drawers is once it's done loading, it will close the drawer. And that way I know it's done with its load. OK, so I have that one inserted in. I need to double check that the settings are correct. So I'll go into the GI skylight, click on the map button, and make sure that this file is where it's supposed to be. Looks like it's not. So let's go into my resources. Let's go into V-Ray, HDRI. And you can see why organization is important here. So I can easily go back and find. There's the ENV file. And let's make sure we get that. Perfect. So those two are installed. That's good. That means I have my environment. I still do need my sun installed. So I'm going to create a layer for environment and a sublayer for sun. There it is. So I have environment. I have sun. On the sun layer, I'm going to create a V-Ray sun. I should load the V-Ray toolbars by now. So let me go ahead and load those real quick. Let me go to my toolbar layout. I'll go to File and then Open. And I have this on my flash drive for easy access. There it is. Perfect. Now I can choose the V-Ray Sun right here. We'll uncheck Manual Control. And I want this to match up with the settings that I have listed on the website. So I'll double check here. My sun settings, it's San Francisco on 6/15 at 2:45 with daylight savings on. So there we are. This was 6:15. Daylight savings was on, and it was at 2:45. Seconds don't really matter. We'll go ahead and say OK. And remember, I have to put this into my scene. There's the sun. It's in the scene. I want to make sure it's on the sun layer, so let me change object layer. There it is. So I have the sun. I have the environment installed. I'm getting close. Next pieces of the puzzle are obviously assigning appropriate materials and texture mapping. You guys don't need to watch me do that. I think you're well accomplished at that by now. Those materials would be assigned not in the master site, but in the retreat base. So I can flip this over into rendered mode, and we can see that the materials are ready to go on the building. Let me jump back over into the master site. So I have the materials done. The other thing that comes in here is sometimes you want extra objects that enhance the overall rendering. And so these are the kinds of things that you could, if you're proficient and good at Photoshop, you could very easily Photoshop in, and they'd probably take you a lot less time than to actually render them. And what I like to tell people about rendering is, theoretically, in V-Ray, you could render the perfect scene. You could have every blade of grass. You could render it perfect. That would take you, let's say, 100% of your time to do it. If you did Photoshop, you could basically spend 100% of your time in Photoshop and get a pretty good rendering. Or you could spend 50% of that time and do a combination of V-Ray and Photoshop. So you can cut down on the amount of time it takes to create the perfect rendering just by meshing Photoshop and V-Ray. This isn't a Photoshop class, so I'm not going to sit here and teach you guys that part of it. So I'm going to teach you the V-Ray part, but recognize that collaging in, using the grass clone stamp and that sort of thing is a really good strategy versus actually rendering it out. So in this particular scene, I don't have an ocean and I don't have any grass just yet. And I'm noticing here that when I added those V-Ray toolbars, it tweaked my view just a little bit. So I'm going to go back and reset that view. So let me go to named views. I'm going to rename this one as render 1, like that. Now, I've been very careful as I set up my view. The only piece of grass that I'm going to see is right there. And so it's close up, and I can deal with that piece of grass and not the rest of the grass. So I'm being careful about how I set it up. I do, however, see a lot of ocean. So for you guys that are doing the ocean file, I have on the course website some stuff to help you out. And if you go to Resources and you go to the Rhino Blocks library, and we go into Landscape, these are the things that I have set up for you. I have an ocean file that will bring in what I use as the ocean, and I'll show you that in just a second. I have some grass. I have some rocks. I also, for those of you that are working in Lake Tahoe, have a Lake Tahoe file. It's not perfect. It's hard to render the mountains of Lake Tahoe perfectly, but it's close. It's a pretty heavy file, so you'll want to bring it in as a block. So you'll have your master site, but this will come in as a block. I'll do a sample with this in it so you guys can see that as part of it. So I need the ocean. I'll click on the ocean. I'm going to download the Ocean 3DM Rhino block. I already have. There is also an ocean material package that you'll want to have as well. Those are both available there for you to use. So now it's time to bring in that ocean. So I'm going to make the blocks layer active here. I'll go to File, and then, Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And I need to go find the ocean file, which should be in my Resources folder inside of Rhino, Rhino Blocks, Landscape. There it is. There's the ocean. And I'll go ahead and say OK. This is, again, going to be a link and a reference. And I'll say OK. And I will drop this file in. What this is, because V-Ray does not support rendering infinite planes with displacement mapping on them, which would be the waves, this is a giant disk. It's kind of like a dinner plate. and it has slightly curled edges on it so that we can adjust where that horizon is going to be. So first thing I need to do is I need to place it so that it falls where the coast should fall. So it's in the scene. I'm going to move it, and then V for vertical, and I'm going to drop it down until it hits right about where the beach would be, right about there. So I've dropped that file in. You'll notice that if I jump back to my render 1 view, that then provides my horizon. I need to make sure that this has the correct material assigned to it. So let me go to V-Ray Materials. Let me make sure that my ocean is here. There it is. I'm going to preview it. It looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and reload the ocean just to make sure. Let me go and import the material. Perfect. All right, just making sure that that's there. So everything's starting to get set up. If I wanted the grass to go here, the grass is another little block that comes in. What it is it's a series of curved planes that have a grass texture applied to them. The grass is tall, so it's kind of tall grass, and it looks pretty good if you look at it from the side. If you look at it from the top, it's going to look really lame. So if you look at it from the side, it kind of cheats the rendering a little bit. So I'll go to File, or excuse me, Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And there's my bunch grass. Go ahead and say OK. It's again going to be a link and a reference, and I'm going to drop it in right about there. Adjust its placement in the top view here. And so we'll move it just a little bit. Now, for this to work, I need lots of them. So I could array these on a surface. So let me take this, and I'm going to explode it so that I have just the small piece of surface right there. And I could do an array SRF. Base point for objects on the array will go right there at the center. Reference normal for objects, it's going to be the default, I believe. So I'll just hit Enter. Select target surface for array. There's my target surface. Number of elements in one direction. This is a guess, maybe 15. Number of elements in the other direction. Let's try another 15. And that was the wrong. I selected the surface instead. So let's try that one more time. Select objects to array. There we go. Select base point. There. Normal. Select surface for array there. U and V. There we go. If we look at it, there's a bunch of those intersecting pieces. I probably needed a few less of those. It's starting to get a little bit heavy. Furthermore, I'm probably going to need to go through and delete the ones that are in the front here so that they're out of the way. Maybe I can do this better in the top view. I mean, not select my terrain there. Not the building either. So the problem here is that you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to take this and hide it, and then get rid of all those. And let me go ahead and show that again. And let me show this as render 1. There it is. So you see that I'm controlling what I'm seeing. And so all of that grass is there. I should make sure that my grass material is correctly loaded, which it's not. So let me go ahead and replace that. Let me import the material, and it is under landscape. And that's should load. I really should fix the ocean material and the bunch grass material in their blocks so that each time when it loads them, it'll load them correctly, because at this point I'd have to go back and replace it each time. So that's showing up correctly, which is going to have it show up here in the rendering. Okay, so I've put the ocean in, I've put this in, I've put the bunch grass in. I'm basically ready to start doing that first round of rendering tests. As is the case, always worth doing a small render test before you do a big render test. So I go into my V-Ray options, I go into output, I'm going to unlock it, get the current view aspect, so exactly what I see is what I'm going to get. I'll lock it, and then I would make this much, much smaller, would say maybe 100. And this is so that I can test the settings and make sure that it's good. Then I'll go ahead and initiate the render. Before I do that, let me save it, just because I'm getting a little nervous here. And then I can go ahead and do the render and test that one out. So I'm not sure what this shadow is. I have to go back and double check why that's not showing up. It may be that I need an infinite plane underneath the ocean. I wasn't thinking that I needed that, but I think I might now that I'm going back and double checking it. So let me add that V-Ray infinite plane. But I want that infinite plane to be down below the ocean. So we'll go about like there. And this is why you do those small test renders, because you find those problems before. Now it's all black. So I'm going to have to figure out something's going wrong there, and I'll sort out what's wrong with it. Again, you do the small test render to kind of see how it plays out. So that's the scope of what we're trying to do. Like I said, I'm not feeling like all of you are going to get there today. That's okay. But you should get to a point where you can bring your building into, even if it's unresolved. You know, basically I could see yours there, and there's still design work to be done, obviously, but you could bring that into the site and test it out, see how it fits, and make some modifications. So you can still do large parts of what we're trying to do today and keep working on that file and update it, as an example. So anyway, I'm going to come back and figure out what's wrong with that. In the meantime, for those of you that are doing the Tahoe site file, I'm going to do some work on that just so you can see it in parallel. And I apologize that I did it in this order. Maybe next class I'll flip it and do the Tahoe site first. But I figure it might as well go through and show you that part of it as well, even though it'll keep me talking a little bit longer. So if you feel like you're done and don't want to listen to me anymore, just start working. That's okay. But for those of you that want to see me work on the Tahoe file, I'll do a Tahoe file really quick. So here we are, brand new Rhino file. This time, instead of bringing the original site file in, that's the SketchUp, and working with the SketchUp file, I'm going to go to the resources and I'm going to go and find the actual Tahoe file, because there's two pieces in the Tahoe file. There we go. This updated Tahoe block includes the Tahoe block 3DM, which will be used as your master site file, and the Tahoe site 3DM, which is the base. Let me double check here. There's two files to try to help you organize it a little bit. So there we go. I have Tahoe block and Tahoe site. The Tahoe site is the smaller one. That's the one that you use as your master site. The Tahoe block is what you'll bring into that does Lake Tahoe and all the surrounding mountains and whatever. So let me go ahead and open that Tahoe site file. And I keep making modifications to this each semester, so that's why there's updated versions. Oh. This was inside a zip file. So once it opens, I need to save it. So I'll go to File and then Save As. And I'm going to put it on my flash drive into today's folder. going to call this one Tahoe Master Site. And I'll go ahead and click Save. And so this is the equivalent of the SketchUp file, only it's the Lake Tahoe version of it. And so I can bring my building into this the same way that I did in the beach file. So let me go to Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And I'll go find my retreat base, same as I did before. I'm going to link it as a reference. Say OK. And I will drop that in. You can see that it's very, very small. So we'll drop it in maybe about there. I need to move it so that it ends up being vertical. Actually, I should probably look at this in the top view because that might not have been the right place. So I'll look at it here. Yeah, it's definitely not in the right place. Let me go into my rendered view. And then I need to move this so that's right about there. And then I need to move it vertically. Zoom selected. Oh, it's a little high, so we'll move it vertically, and we'll drop it down. I'm going to turn off my snaps here. There we go. I'm starting to see it against the hillside here. We'll move it down a little bit more. Oh, it also looks like it may need to be rotated a bit. So let me take it and rotate it. I'm going to turn back on my snaps. And we'll rotate it like that. And we're getting close to where it fits. So this probably needs to go down just a little bit more so that that actually sticks in. So we'll go to Move. I'm going to move it back this way a little bit. And that's starting to look OK. I probably need to spend a little bit more time, but I don't want you guys to have to just keep watching me. I would do the same strategy for this integration, where I make sure that the hillside matches up. And this placement isn't quite right because you can see that the hill actually goes under this back part of the building. But once I'm at that place, we have this bit of hillside. But then we might want to bring in the rest of Tahoe. And I'm doing that as a block because it's such a big file. So I go into Edit, Blocks, and then Insert Block Instance. And I need to go find that Tahoe site file. And I actually need to copy it from here into my flash drive. So let me go here. Let me go ahead and paste that in. There it is. There's the Tahoe block. So there's the Tahoe block. We'll go ahead and open that. We'll say OK. It's a link as a reference. We'll go ahead and say OK. And we need to make sure that those guys line up. So let me go ahead and move this so that those 2 points come together. And there it is. You can see it lining up. And you can see how big the file is. But this is to make your life a little bit easier. And it will help when you go and do your renderings, especially your interior renderings. So let me zoom select it on the building itself. And as we flip around here, there you can see the mountains in Tahoe and all of that sort of thing out to the sides. So that's how you would get the site file for Tahoe if you were working on the Tahoe site file. Of course, you could also collage in pictures, which is a whole lot easier than trying to set up the renderings this way, but I have to make it so that you guys can have even treatment whether you're doing the coast view or the non-coast view. Okay, so I don't want to keep talking. I wanted to at least get you through this part of the integration. All the rest of the steps are the same. The rocks, the tree, or the rocks, the grass, that sort of thing. You'd set up your view the same way, etc. I didn't actually put the rock into the grass, but I think it's fairly obvious. You bring it in as a block, and then you can put that in as well. So remember, all I want you to do is get to the point where you have your building into the site, even if your building isn't done, even if you don't have materials on it, and give me something to show me that you worked today. If it doesn't have materials, just do a screenshot of it. Just something. But this is the direction we're all going. So you want to keep kind of working on it from there. Okay? Any questions? No? All right. I'll let you guys start.